Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Morgan. I'm back after what seems like millions and millions of years. I finally decided to crawl out of my mother's basement and stop getting checks in order to do another iteration of Ham and Egg News. You probably remember me as the person who liked to say fuck a lot. And still does. That's me.
Morgan, what are you doing here?
I'm back again. It's fucking great. So hopefully I'll be able to take up a lot more of your time than Paul will, because he's kinda lame. Let's face it.
I'm sitting right here.
Regardless of that, let's get started with some ham and egg news, because I'm pretty hungry, even though I just ate.
All right, then.
We got Brian and myself here today. So,
how's it going?
Yeah, it's going all right, I guess. So.
Just the two of us?
Just the two of us?
So
yeah,
now I'm controlling the slides, and that is dangerous.
Oh, boy, I don't know what's going to happen.
Probably the weirdest bromance I've ever had the opportunity to see at Answers News is what's happening right now.
We finalized the adoption of my daughter, Macy, last Tuesday. Yeah, so good. And I had no pictures ready because she didn't tell me in advance, but I thought I'd show pictures now because I'm a proud papa.
I wonder if they started showing all these pictures of, like, the kids and stuff to kind of humanize them more, instead of making them seem like these soulless, demonic, propagandistic husks of people that they actually are.
If you're senior staff at Answers in Genesis, I'm pretty sure you've resigned yourself to being a propagandistic husk. But ultimately, this whole Answers in Genesis endeavor isn't to convince anyone of anything. It's just to sell books and DVDs and theme park tickets. Putting up pictures of your kids is an old used car salesman trick. Same thing here. They know you're more likely to buy things from someone you're personally connected to.
Happy to share that with
you.
you.
All right, that's wonderful news.
That's good stuff.
So, yeah, congratulations.
No! I forgot to silence my cell phone. I'm sorry. Hang on. I'm going to remedy that problem.
At this time, please silence all cell phones. And
Son
note
of a
that
bitch.
emergency exits
This is the
are
most
located
annoying thing
up
that could ever
front,
possibly happen.
to your right
Hang
and
on.
left, and
How do I
along
stop
the left
this?
side of the room.
Oh, here we go.
And then also, I thought I'd let you talk about this. We have at the museum and the Art Encounter happening Day Latino.
Day Latino.
So what is that?
This motherfucker just say Dea Latino? That shit is great. Dea Latino. It's got a nice ring to it because it's completely wrong.
Yeah, Latin Day essentially is what that is. We're going to have a bunch of different people who come in that actually help people out doing Spanish things.
One of my favorite things to do in my spare time, believe it or not, is to do Spanish things.
If you know some Spanish-speaking people, or if you yourself are Spanish-speaking, you want to come hear things.
I'm not entirely sure, but I'm going to go out on a limb of a very long branch and say that there aren't very many of those Spanish-speaking people in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. But I could be very, very wrong, in which case I would be very, very surprised.
According to the internet, Kentucky is nearly 3% Hispanic. That's 45th highest out of the 50 states.
It's not just Latin America, but God's blessed AIG in multiple ways.
That's right. I mean, yeah, we hit Latin America, Central America fairly well.
Oh my God. And we're still doing marketing. I feel like there's got to be a way to wrap this up that doesn't take up so much damn time before we get to the good shit, which is the shit that I like to talk shit about. I miss Ken and Georgia. They're always down to do business. Dirty deeds done dirt cheap kind of business.
We also have an office in Australia.
Yep.
Could you imagine the outcry if AIG did not have a ministry or any sort of outreach in Australia? I think that would be the world's greatest plot hole.
Actually, AiG Australia didn't officially kick off until May of 2018, so it's just a few months old. Though last July, they did start selling books out of Ken's brother's warehouse in Australia.
If you're here, you know a lot about the books. And, and if Carol's here, she knows all about them. But otherwise, they can come and peruse in the bookstore there anyway.
For actual brothers, they don't have much of a bromance going. However, if you're into Ken Ham drama, and who isn't, there's a long history behind it. Answers in Genesis started in 1980 with the merger of two Australian creationist groups, calling itself Creation Science Foundation. The whole venture was a partnership between Ken Ham and Carl Weiland. According to Carl's reports, the two were best friends, calling each other every day, involved in each other's families, the whole thing. In 1994, the company gave Ken Ham $90,000 to found an American branch, which he called Answers in Genesis. 10 years later, around the same time Mark Zuckerberg was creating Facebook behind the back of the Winklevoss twins, the relationship between Ken and Carl began to sour, as the Australian board thought that AiG US was leaning too heavily on Ken's personality. That started a whole power play where the US board stopped taking calls altogether from Australia, Carl started taping phone conversations, AiG US started changing article content and author names, and all kinds of other shenanigans. For the next year, Ken wouldn't talk to Carl, and Ken refused to let AiG be beholden to anyone other than himself, and basically held the rest of the world offices hostage with his power position in the US. Finally, in 2006, Ken kicked Carl out of his own company and split from the other offices, leaving the former Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and South Africa AiG branches to rename themselves Creation Ministries International. I'll link some documents in the description if anyone wants the dirty details. So the plot around that plot hole is even juicier than you imagined.
First, we'll start with this one. Take it away.
All right, woolly mammoths will roam new Jurassic Park-style theme park with cave lions and extinct horses in 10 years, Russian scientists say.
If I had no money for every single time I saw this article in the news, I feel like somehow I would still end up being rich.
Cool. I talked to Georgia about this before she left out, and she's a little skeptical whether they can actually do this. Now, it is more plausible than Jurassic Park, as we were talking earlier. Well, Jurassic Park, if you remember that movie.
I don't remember that movie at all, actually. What are you even talking about?
But why does Georgia consider cloning a mammoth to be more plausible than cloning a dinosaur? According to her, all these creatures went extinct in the flood at exactly the same time just 4,000 years ago. Since she thinks they all died at the same time, there should be equally fresh DNA samples out there of all the species that died in the flood. It shouldn't make any difference which species they're trying to bring back. It's almost like they're acknowledging that we don't have DNA from older creatures, despite the ways they like to misrepresent the soft tissue work of Mary Schweitzer and others.
They took some found dinosaur DNA and plugged it in with other DNA from like frogs or something and made their new dinosaurs. That's not, as far as we know, genetically possible.
I suspect that if Jurassic Park was being written in 2018, they wouldn't have used frog DNA for that plot point. I know they wanted to use frogs in order to have some excuse as to how the park dinosaurs started reproducing asexually, but now we have example of crawfish and lizards and other creatures doing this after single point mutations. If they were writing Jurassic Park today, they'd merge the T-Rex DNA with ostriches, since Schweitzer's work has shown that only avian osteocytes will bind with T-Rex DNA fragments. It turns out bird DNA is more closely related to dinosaurs than crocodile DNA.
Evidently, with the woolly mammoth and the older cats, they can take DNA from the permafrost they found it in, and then use that with the relatives we have today to maybe make clones.
That's true. The article talks about splicing mammoth DNA segments into elephant DNA to make some kind of mammoth-elephant hybrid they hope will survive modern-day Russia.
They're all part of the same kind.
Right.
Now, I know when we talk about kinds, sometimes people don't know what we mean by kind.
Nope. I no idea. What is it? Tell me, Bodie.
Kind isn't necessarily the same thing as a species.
Sure.
If things can ultimately interbreed with each other, usually they're part of the same kind.
Yeah, but
Remember, kids, a kind is not always necessarily a kind. Kind of.
right.
Now, that's not always the case. In the case of elephants, it's at an order level. With humans, it's at a species level.
Sure.
Determined by something. Kind of.
If you could actually make woolly mammoths,
I feel a joke coming on.
would you use the wool? I mean, is this like sheep? I mean, do you hold them down and shear them? How would you do that?
How do you shear woolly mammoth?
Bodie, as always, is asking the real questions.
They also mentioned a little side note here. They mentioned that along with the woolly mammoth, they'd like to bring back the woolly rhinoceros.
Did somebody say rhino?
Sure. Why not?
This
How
answer,
do you shear that one?
I don't grab it by the horn.
Just because we rhinos are a horny bunch doesn't mean you can just grab us by the horn without consent. I will only consent to Bodie or Ken Ham. I don't like the look of that Brian guy. Keep him far away from my horn.
The relative of a woolly rhinoceros is something called the elasmotherium.
Elasma what?
Elasmotherium.
Ectoplasm ethereal?
Elasmotherium.
Eargasm material?
Elasmotherium.
Oh, elasmotherium. What a big word. You must be so proud.
I've just impressed myself by saying that word. But anyway, I didn't really. But so you have, within the rhinoceros family, you have rhinoceroses with two horns.
Is it really rhinoceroses? Now that's a word that I've never said as much as I've said octopuses. Interestingly enough.
Bicornus, and then those with one horn, unicornus.
It's true. We're just chubby unicorns. Real unicorns have curves, y'all.
So you go to the King James Bible, when it says, behold the unicorn, it's actually talking about most likely something like the elasmotherium.
That's right.
Well, I mean, the elasmotherium went extinct about 29,000 years ago, so probably not that. Why wouldn't you just talk about the single-horned rhinos, or Rhinoceros unicornus, which actually would have been around when both the Bible was originally authored and the King James Version was translated? It fits just as well, and you look less silly that way. You would still look completely and utterly ridiculous, but slightly less so than when you claim King James chose his words based on an extinct animal when he had living animals that fit the description just as well.
And I mention that because so often skeptics will quote that verse in the King James Bible and scoff at the Bible.
I think scoffing at the King James Bible is just the normal reaction to anybody who quotes anything from the King James Bible.
As an atheist, I do find the wording to be amusing. I know that it should have been rhino instead of unicorn, but my main problem with the Bible here is that if it were authored by an all-powerful God who wants to get his message across to all people in all times, then he certainly has the ability to make sure silly hiccups in translation don't happen, so the fact that they did happen is evidence against the Bible being the Word of God. It's not the best evidence, that's for sure, but it is evidence nonetheless.
Look, your Bible teaches about unicorns. It's a book of fairy tales.
I mean, it is a book of fairy tales, but not because of the unicorns. More because of the magical incantations, the talking animals, contests of wizards, and the raising of the dead, just to name a few.
I just say, okay, you got all this methane given off. Why not go out and harvest it? I mean, people pay good money for that.
And a great harvest of methane every time you go to Taco Bell.
Between you and Vice Rhino, we got a really classy show going today.
Artificial genes show life does not have to be based on DNA. As a Christian, I could tell you life isn't based on DNA. God is life. God doesn't have DNA. They're spiritual beings. Think of angels and things like that. You know, they have life and they don't have DNA.
How do we know that, though? That's what I want to know. Like, where is this all coming from? Like, can you really know? Were you there? Have you seen it? Have you seen an angel's non-DNA? Like, these are the real questions that you should be asking.
Well, Genesis 6:4 says, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them." This same Hebrew phrase for sons of God is found in Job, definitely describing angels. So that means in the most plain reading, which AiG is fond of, the Nephilim are the result of angels having sex with human women. It would seem not only do angels have DNA, it's conveniently compatible with human DNA. What was that Bodie said?
Things can ultimately interbreed with each other, usually they're part of the same kind.
So, since human and angels can reproduce, I guess we'd have to say that humans are in the angel kind, or angels are in the human kind. Nifty.
You know, from a moral perspective, from a Christian perspective, you know, we do need to be careful about modifying human DNA and things like that. I mean, I think there's a moral element behind all that. But
I never understood that because that's something that Georgia always put out when she would talk about things like that. And it still, to me, just seems like let's stifle innovation because there's got to be some sort of moral high ground that we have to achieve anytime we're looking at things with science.
There aren't any verses that can directly speak to the morality of gene editing, which isn't surprising because the writers obviously didn't know anything about genetics. But even so, when it comes to the morality of gene editing, we're really just talking about advanced selective breeding, which seems condoned in the Old Testament. And since the AiG view is that our genes used to be perfect and sin has been making them worse, it seems like attempting to get back to better genes would be like reducing sin. A moral objection here seems to be more discomfort than Bible interpretation.
But that obviously goes towards keeping in line with their statement of faith, in that they can't accidentally discover something that goes against their worldview.
Oh, that's a good point. The more we learn, the more evidence they have to ignore. If they were actually confident that nothing in nature contradicted their particular interpretation of the Bible, they wouldn't be afraid of such things.
We look at the DNA, which is incredibly complex.
It's more complex than anything we can make,
Yes.
correct?
It is a code system that is compact. It is incredible.
Yeah.
And people look at it, no, that was all natural causes.
Well, yeah, I mean, insert complexity does not denote intelligence arguments that are like billions and billions and billions and billions of examples long.
Snowflakes, crystals, coral reefs, weather patterns, pendulum art, relationships, blood spatter.
Right? Obviously. Jesus.
Hey, did you notice?
Yeah.
I've got a new mug today.
You got mugged.
And you've got a new mug today, too.
I do. You know what? I forgot to mention
I don't
that.
know if people see, a lot of people are pretty familiar with the news. You know, they know I have a mug that I typically use.
Absolutely. When I went to the Creation Museum, I deliberately bought the same one that Bodie uses in every episode.
Is this going to be a shameless plug?
You know,
I've
I
got a
don't
feeling
know,
it's going to be a
but
shameless plug.
we've got some brand new mugs coming out.
A shameless plug? On Answers News?
I like Bodie's mug. It's got a fucking dragon on it. That doesn't mean I think dragons were fucking real, though. That would be crazy.
Heard of
You
the
guys
Lost
ever heard of the Lost
Squadron? The planes that went down in
World War II, yeah.
World War II, right? What
In
was it?
Greenland,
right?
yeah,
over in Greenland. Actually, the details are on the mug.
You look at the Arctic ice sheet, you look at the Greenland ice sheet, and they would say, yeah, each one of these layers you see in here are an annual layer. Have you guys ever heard things like that?
No, never. That would be ridiculous. Why would you even say that?
Like the tree ring dating of dendrochronology, the science of ice ring dating has known conditions that produce best results, and those results are independently corroborated through multiple methods, including visible layers, dust layers, and differing electrical conductivity. One such factor is relative snowfall, with less snow being better. In Antarctica, the rate of snow accumulation is low. The interior of Greenland is another useful ice core site, also receiving relatively little snow. However, just as Minnesota gets more snow than Florida, while being part of the same country, the shore of Iceland gets much more snow than the interior where the annual rings are typically considered. I know where the boys are going with this, so recognizing that not all of Greenland is the same is important to note.
They say you add up the layers, look, it goes back hundreds of thousands of years. Well, the problem is, you know, they knew right where they landed this squadron, they went back, they couldn't find it.
Part of the reasons they couldn't find it in the first place is that they weren't taking glacial drift into consideration. Since the planes landed on an active glacier, the ice flow pushed the planes a full 2 miles away from the original crash point in the relatively few years since. As you can imagine, when ice is moving that quickly, an ice core from there would be relatively meaningless for dating purposes.
And it was under 250 feet of ice layers. And this is less than 50 years.
In less than 50 years. So those are not annual layers.
Those are not annual layers.
Right. There's no standard thickness for an ice layer. It depends entirely on the amount of snowfall, of course. That's one reason ice cores from less snow regions are preferable. The logistics of drilling and transporting is easier with thinner layers. But of course there are places where thick layers form. The shore of Greenland typically gets 2 meters of snow per year. That's over 6 feet for my American viewers. So the amount of snow covering the plain makes complete sense.
So you can get a good pre-mug with good apologetics all at one time.
But not good science. The actual information about these planes is so easy to find, it's difficult to imagine these mugs could have been designed by intellectually honest individuals. However, if you're in the market for a good mug of truth, may I recommend this one from Teespring? Link in the description.
We probably spent way too much time on these mugs.
We
but anyway,
spent too much time on mugs.
They are pretty neat.
But it's totally fine because it's not exactly like I was hoping for anything any more interesting than this.
This experiment will shoot ghostly particles through Earth. Answer why we exist. That's pretty fancy title, right?
That's a pretty grand claim.
It's like the most clickbaity article I've ever read, ever.
I really wish they would just look at science research and not exaggerated articles from Fox News.
You know why we exist? To give glory to God.
On the same end of that. I thought you were going to say a joke for a second. I was a little hesitant.
That was the joke. That's why it was funny. Oh, fuck.
Is this set up for a joke or a real theological point? Amen.
That would be a fun game to play. Is this a joke or a real theological event?
Out in the secular world, when people reject God and His Word, they're left with a worldview that nature is all that there is.
And that's just awful, horrible, death. Angry, sad, keywords.
I'm not close to the idea that something supernatural exists. Someone would just have to define that for me, and then demonstrate it, which should be possible if the supernatural interacts with the natural. And if the realms don't interact, then the supernatural doesn't really affect us.
According to Romans 1, they know God exists. Right. The problem is they're trying to suppress that, and so they're reaching out to anything else. And in this instance, they're trying to figure out, well, why do we exist? Well, let's go shoot some particles through the Earth and find out.
Like far too many mainstream media articles about science, the claims here are a bit hyperbolic. The experiment has some potential to help us understand the physical processes in play during the first seconds of our universe. The discoveries will be valid and useful whether those processes were kicked off by a god or something else.
It's massively expensive. This is called the Dune experiment. And I know there's TV shows and movies like Dune,
Those are all based on a 1965 book series by Frank Herbert. Where's your nerd cred, Bodie?
Moving on to this one, this was a fun one.
How dragonfly wings get their patterns. Nature does not generate anything. Nature is a concept of all that exists. So this is actually a reification fallacy.
There's my fallacy, boy. Atta girl.
Read the article, and it's pretty much, we don't know, maybe, possibly. I think this is a good guess based on our worldview.
There's still more questions to ask than answers in that one. But.
I'm entirely unsure as to why a hypothesis has to be based on any sort of worldview versus just sets of data that you try to extrapolate from. It's just so bizarre. It's what it always has to come down to for them, or else they can't argue anything. They have to try and denounce science as much as possible, because if they don't, people start getting clued into the fact that, hey, maybe it's okay to have an estimation or a guess or a figure of something rather than an absolute objective truth, and that it's okay to continue to strive towards whatever sort of truth you're looking for versus, oh yeah, just God did it. They try and say that over and over without saying it explicitly a lot of the time, I feel, and it's unfortunate because that's just not good enough, and that shouldn't be good enough for anybody.
Royal Ontario Museum.
Canada. This is Canada.
To display newly discovered dinosaur Zuul.
So, if you recognize the name Zuul...
There is no Dana, only Zuul.
What a lovely singing voice you must have.
This should ring a bell from an old movie called Ghostbusters. Remember Ghostbusters back in the day? If you've seen that,
they don't want to raise their hand.
Never heard of it. What are you talking about?
Who was Zuul? Do you remember in the movie?
Well, the name Zuul refers to a demigod worshipped around 6000 BC.
So they named it Zuul, destroyer of shins.
We had a bit of fun with the name, but it refers to the shape of the skull and the resemblance that the head of this dinosaur, with this broad, rounded snout, forward-facing nostrils, rugose, gnarly forehead, and importantly, two big horns swept sweeping back from behind the eyes. To us, it resembled Zuul from the Ghostbusters movie franchise.
This remnant is 76 million years old, and we still have soft tissue intact.
Yeah.
Here we go.
I put out a dinosaur soft tissue video last week. It's like the 4th one on my channel. I'm taking a pass on this. Click on the link above to see them.
You got to bury something deeply and quickly to protect it from scavengers and decomposition, which requires a rapid burial, which would happen at the time of the flood.
That's right, and they would admit that. You know, that thing was buried, you know.
Then they mention that later on in the article. It's buried quickly.
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it an admission. It's something that creationists have borrowed from the scientific worldview and pretend like science don't know about it or want to keep it a secret. Of course, fossilized things have to be buried before they completely decompose, or there'd be nothing left to fossilize. Scientists have never thought that the burial was the slow part, yet this misconception is endlessly perpetuated by creationist organizations.
It was a scaly creature, no feathers.
No feathers.
What? No feathers?
No feathers.
And this creature is actually one of the bird-hipped dinosaurs.
Okay, Bodie got way too Trumpy with those hand motions there, and it got me a little frightened. Oh my gosh.
Now, for those of you who don't know, dinosaurs are defined by having one of two hip structures, lizard hip or bird hip.
Represented by Bodie as one hand with 5 fingers and another hand with 5 fingers.
Back in 1888, H.G. Seeley observed differences in dinosaur hip structures, and the informal bird hip, lizard hip moniker started to be in use. The formal names of the lineages are Ornithischians and Saurischians, the latter of which were the ancestors of the birds. While birds have a so-called reverse pubis, like all Ornithischians, some Saurischians, the ones most closely related to birds, also have this reverse pubis configuration. So not only is Bodie referencing out-of-date terminology, but it is also not a true dichotomy. Once again, creation arguments rely on wordplay rather than science.
It's not exactly like a bird hip, but it is. Yeah. It's got similarities to a bird hip.
Right. Scary how close we are to the truth.
Out in the world, there are people who talk about dinosaurs evolving into birds. You might think, oh, well, the bird hip ones evolved into the bird. No, no, that's actually wrong.
No, the lizard
they say the lizard hip ones evolved into birds.
The bird hip. Are you confused yet?
Gosh, that's so confusing. It's like ridiculous.
Now, never mind the fact that they found a lot of birds buried in the same rock layers as dinosaurs.
Or even supposedly older than dinosaurs.
Yeah,
right?
in many cases.
Yeah. Again, Bodie is playing with misinformation about how evolution works. Birds are the descendants of dinosaurs, but not the only descendants. Your cousins continue to live even when you and your siblings are born. Both branches share an ancestor, your grandparents. Both branches exist at the same time, and both branches develop independently. And if your cousins stop having kids and their line ends, that doesn't affect the fate of your line. Fossils of dinosaurs only, then dinosaurs with birds, then only birds, is consistent with both the evidence and the scientific model. But the Bible says that birds were created before land animals. So if that were true, we would expect someday to find at least some bird fossils in the lowest pre-flood layers, but we do not.
Well, I mean, and again, it kind of shows the lengths you go to try to explain away the evidence to make it fit your worldview.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to tell that to me twice, honey.
I want to see this thing in a museum someday. I think it'd
have to go to Canada, right?
Awesome. Yeah.
Canada.
Canada.
Canada. Canada geese.
California school district's less sexist dress code draws mixed reviews.
So, well, I was a teacher for 13 years in the public schools, and
that's almost as long as Kent Hovind claims to have taught in schools.
Can only ever pick articles about society that are from Fox News.
You know, it's interesting. On my printed copy of this, you guys may not be able to see it, but there's an advertisement with a guy without a shirt on. I thought, really?
You do know that the ads you see online has less to do with the site you're visiting and more to do with the keywords you've searched. Like when you do a search for bike repair and suddenly all your ads are for new bikes.
What are you looking at in your spare time, Bodie? It's like the same shit that I'm looking at. I like it.
Okay, from an evolutionary perspective, we're all just rearranged atoms.
And Eves.
Why wearing clothes?
Why wear clothes at all?
Why wear anything?
The animals don't wear clothes.
Why not be cannibals or rape or murder? So, I mean, those things happen all the time out in nature.
You know what? He's right. So, I'm done. I'm naked all the time. I'm going to go out and rape somebody, and then I'll probably eat them. I mean, it's true. Why not? Fuck it. Let's do it now. Do it live. Tweet it. Facebook Live it. The world is my oyster.
The Bible tells us to wear respectable attire, to be modest, not to cause somebody else to lust.
What if Bodie's balding causes me to lust? Does that mean he has to wear a hat? Because I think he should wear a hat.
So that's why we wear clothes. It comes out of a biblical worldview.
I don't know. People in the snow obviously don't wear clothes because they've never heard of Jesus.
The goal of this particular change in the dress code for this school was to be, in their words, less sexist. Don't focus on the girls so much, so the girls have more freedom to wear what they want to wear. But here's my question. I thought in our modern day culture, within secular thinking, there were no genders.
What an idiot. I'm sorry. Oh my god. I have to pee.
We got time for one more. We got to wrap it up.
We're actually over time.
So I guess we're done? Morgan doesn't YouTube, but a link to her Twitter account will be in the description. And thanks to Vice Rhino for stopping by. His videos are a priority for my Friday, every Friday. Subscribe if for some reason you haven't already.
Thanks for having me, Paul. Sorry about your door. Bye.
Wait, what happened to my door? Rhino? Rhino? Huge thanks to my patrons. You literally make all this possible. Please check out the link in the description if you can join them in supporting what we do at Paulogia. While you're there, there's links to the Paulogia Discord server, Facebook and Twitter, and a Teespring store where you can find ham and egg stuff. Thank you everyone for watching. Until next time, later.